Okay, hi everybody. So today we're going to be talking about polio. So before we get started on polio, what I'd like to do is just give a little bit of a history about the polio. So for the most part, polio became pretty popular about the 1940s and 50s, if I remember correctly. The reason being is because at that time, President Roosevelt got polio and then eventually couldn't walk. And so there was a big scare because if the president could get polio, imagine what would happen if your kid got polio, because the president gets the best health care in the world. So let's take a look at polio real quick. The way that the body works is you have your mom, right? And I'm going to draw a really big wound here, okay? And there's and then she gets pregnant with you, right? And then what happens is when the baby is inside the mom, okay, here's the baby inside the mom, and there's the little feet, and that doesn't look too good, that's okay. And then here's the arms and the hands and all that, okay? So when a baby is inside the mother, what's going to happen is they are going to get antibodies from the mother, and these are called maternal antibodies. So what eventually happens is the baby is born, and here's our baby over here, okay, and the baby's born, and after the baby is born, what's going to happen, I'm trying to draw a baby with its feet up, and my drawing doesn't seem to be going too good right now, so here are the arms. So after the baby's born, the baby still has these maternal antibodies. Now, what used to happen in the 1800s and before is the kid would be given milk and water and things such as that. And in the fluids, what would happen, I'm going to try to draw, my drawing's not going too good, but I'm going to try to draw a bottle here with a little, little thing that the baby's drink out of. Okay, and here's the milk, right? So here's milk, and the baby drinks it, right? Or it could be water, whatever it is. And so the baby drinks it. Now, what used to happen was that when they would drink this, the baby would actually get, this is my polio virus in here, there'd be polio in the water. And so when the baby drank the polio would enter the body. Okay? But because they had antibodies from the mother, those maternal antibodies, what would happen is these antibodies would attack the polio virus and kill it. But not only would it do that, it would also build up immunity to polio. So now you would have lifelong immunity. So what I'm going to do here is here's my PY. So here's my polio virus antibodies. Antibodies are shaped by a Y, that's why I have that. So what would happen now is you would have lifelong immunity. So the mom gives you antibodies when you're born, you would drink the polio virus, but because you had the antibodies, it would fight off the polio virus, and then you would develop lifelong immunity. Now, somewhere around 1894, they started to clean up the water. So what happened now is they took out the polio. So they took the polio out, right? And all the other germs that are in there too. So now what would happen is when a baby would drink water or milk or anything like that, they were not being exposed to the polio virus. Well, what happens to these antibodies is as the kid starts to grow, these antibodies start to disappear. So now what happens is, and in the 50s and so in the 40s, they blamed swimming pools, but it could have been any meal in which someone who had the polio virus didn't wash their hands properly and gave it to somebody. But we'll use pools here. So now what they said was that you have somebody and they're swimming in a pool, right? And unfortunately, when you go to the bathroom, nobody ever wipes off their rear end enough to get rid of all the fecal matter that's on there. And because polio can be pooped out, what happens is this gets in the water. So now your polio virus, there's the poop with the polio on it. And then somebody else is in there who's never been exposed to polio, and now they're in there. And what happens is they can get it now. They can get it from here. Okay? So as we just said, now they don't have the antibodies to fight off the polio. Okay, so now it's inside their body. Now, for the most part, I don't know if I've mentioned this already, but only about 1% of people who get polio actually get paralyzed. So let's take a look now of what happens once this gets inside the body. So the polio is going to enter into the mouth. Okay, and I can't draw, so here's a nose, and then there's the eye, and here's somebody's head. All right? And for the most part, the polio is going to enter into the mouth. Okay? Again, it's the fecal oral route. It could be somebody already has the polio virus, and they go to the bathroom, they don't wash their hands, they make food for somebody else, they give it to them, and now that person gets it. But now it's going to get inside of here. It can do two things. It can enter cells that are in the mouth, which we'll look at in a minute, or if we go further down, what can happen is down here in the intestines, it can enter into cells down here also in the intestines. So let's take a look at these. And here's my cells inside the mouth. These are buccal cells. And remember, it can be down here also in the intestines. So now what's going to happen is the polio virus is going to enter into these cells that are in the mouth. Okay, so let's take a look at what happens here. I'm going to take this here, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to enlarge it right here. So now here's my cell. Okay, and just like other cells, there's a receptor on here. Now, for the most part, the polio virus is a single, this could be my virus right here, and viruses have spikes on them, okay, and there's spikes all over. So, for the most part, what's going to happen is the virus is going to attach to the receptor here. Okay, it's going to attach that receptor. Inside of here, we have something called RNA, which is used to make proteins. So this is going to be used to make proteins. Polio is what we call a positive single-strand RNA, and I'm going to explain what that is in a minute. It's a single-strand RNA virus. So after the polio attaches to the receptor, it's going to pull it in to the cell. As it pulls it into the cell membrane, this is my cell membrane here, is going to wrap around it. It's called a vesicle. So now I have, this is the vesicle. This is my polio virus inside. There's my spikes. Okay, and then like we said, I'm going to have RNA inside of here. I'm going to have RNA. Now, as this goes into the cell, eventually what's going to happen is the virus is going to bust out of the vesicle. So this will go away, and now I have the virus inside the cell. And what it will do is it will release this messenger RNA right here. So here's my messenger RNA that's released, okay? Or my RNA. Two things are going to happen with this RNA. First of all, inside of your cells, you have something called a ribosome. Okay, here's a ribosome. And what ribosomes do is ribosomes make proteins. So they read the code, they're going to read the code that's on this RNA, and they're going to bring amino acids over, or amino acids are going to be brought over, they're going to be put together, and it's going to make a protein. So here's my RNA from the virus that's going to go through here. And as it does, it makes something, I said proteins, but before it makes that, it makes something called polyproteins. So these are going to be my polyproteins here. Okay, and these are my polyproteins. All right, so that's my polyproteins. And then the other thing that's going to happen is I am going to have something called RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. We're just going to call it RNA polymerase right now. That's going to make more RNA. I'm holding too many pins here. So now I have my RNA polymerase. And what this is going to do is it's going to make more of the virus RNA. So here's more of the virus RNA. And then what's going to happen is I am going to have enzymes that are going to put all this together, and I will end up with and remember I said those enzymes are called proteases, right? It's going to use these to make the capsule of the virus and the spikes of the virus. And then we're going to get these are going to go inside the virus. And so what's happened now is I have created more of the virus. Okay, so that's how polio is going to work once it's inside a cell. So now if we go back over here, what happens is, as you see, we're making more. So eventually I'm going to start to make more and more and more of the virus. All right, I'm starting to make more and more. And it could be more than one cell. I'm just using one right here. And again, it could be down here in the intestines. But what's going to eventually happen is it's going to bust out of this cell. So now I'm going to have all these polio viruses in the body, okay? Up in the mouth or down here. Well, the immune system is going to respond to this, and that's why a lot of times the first symptoms, and I mentioned this already, the first symptoms in polio, or maybe even the only symptoms in polio, may just be a sore throat or nausea. And that's really not abnormal to get. Sometimes people have headaches, and sometimes they'll get fatigue. Okay, but for the most part, that's not a big deal. I mean, this happens all the time. People get this, and it's no big deal. So now, what's going to happen from here? I'm going to erase this. The virus is now outside of the cell. Okay, it's outside the cell, either here or here. It can enter into the lymph system. Now what lymph is the lymph system is when blood doesn't go back into the bloodstream, it can sometimes go into the lymph system. And you'll notice I have an enlargement right here. That's called a lymph node, okay? And usually your lymph nodes are going to contain white blood cells. So what happens here is this goes in here and it starts to make its way in the lymph system. Like we said, most of the time there's not even any symptoms with polio. That's because when it's in the lymph system, the white blood cells attack it. However, what can happen sometimes is the polio can make its way into the bloodstream because the lymph system actually goes up and dumps into the bloodstream. So now I've got my polio is in the bloodstream. All right? So it's made its way into the bloodstream. When we get viruses in the bloodstream, we call that viremia. Viremia is viruses in the bloodstream. What's going to happen now? From the bloodstream, most of the time it's not going to leave the bloodstream. Most of the time it's not going to leave the bloodstream. What can happen though is it can go from the bloodstream then into muscle. So here's my muscle, all right? And then muscle cells are really big and long. I guess I shouldn't have drawn my muscle to be the same color as my polio virus. So just for a second here, I'm gonna make my polio virus to be blue. So it's not gonna go into, these are my muscle cells, they're multinucleated. All right, and so there it is. And there's my muscle cells, okay, and making up my muscle. It's gonna go, the polio virus goes into the muscle and it goes to the areas between the cells. Okay, it does not go actually into the muscle cells. Polio does not damage the muscle. Okay, it does not damage the muscle. Now, to make muscles move, we need to have nerves. So here's a nerve right here, and here's one here, and here's one here. And then what's going to happen is my nerves are going to come over to my spinal cord. All right? So I'm going to go like this, and here's my spinal cord. And there's the spinal cord. Now, inside the spinal cord, you have different types of nerves. You have nerves that have myelin on them, which make them travel faster. It's a lipid, it's a fat, and it has proteins on it too. That's going to be the white matter. And then you also have nerves that are gray matter. Let me see, what color do I want to use here? Let's go with orange. See if you can see that. So now I'm going to go with blue again. So now, it's the inside of your spinal cord looks something like this, almost like a butterfly. All right, then it's going to go like this and out. The front part, the back part of this is sensory. The back part of your spinal cord is sensory. The front part's motor. So this is motor. That's here. And then what we have is this is going to come, and I'm going to draw it here. It's in the horn here. This is going to be my cell body. So this is the cell body. Okay, that's my cell body. So what happens now is, if you recall, I said we have the polio virus here in the muscle. And what it does is it's actually going to travel towards the cell body. Okay, it's actually going to travel towards the cell body. And by the way, it doesn't come out this way. It should actually come down around this way. This is going to start to travel. So my polio viruses start to travel towards the cell body. This is called retrograde. Okay, and the reason they call it that is because usually I get impulses coming down from the brain, they hit the cell body and they come out to the nerve, and the nerves contract. Once the polio gets to that cell body, it's going to do two different things. It'll actually be inside of it. It's going to do two different things. One, it's going to multiply again, just like we saw over here, and it can cause the cell to actually burst open. The second thing that's going to happen is we have something called macrophages. All right, this is a type of white blood cell. Macrophages are responsible for attacking microbes that are in the body. So we can have macrophages and we have neutrophils. Okay, so there's my neutrophils. And what's going to happen here is they're going to come in and they're going to attack the virus that's right here on the spinal cord. Unfortunately, as they do that, they start to destroy the spinal cord. So we're going to go like this, and they start to destroy the spinal cord. And when they do that, that is going to cause the nerve to die also. So now we got damage, we got the virus inside multiplying, causing the cell body to burst. We also have white blood cells coming and attacking this area of the spine that will affect this muscle. Okay? The thing is that areas that still have healthy muscles, because this might just be in one area of the spine's actually long, I can actually get other neurons and other areas that will go to the muscle, and it will actually help it to grow. They'll actually grow axons and stuff to help the muscle to continue to perform. The problem is, as people get older, this starts to die. So they start to become paralyzed as they get older. Okay, again, so this nerve here dies due to the polio. I have these nerves which will actually start to innervate or supply nerve supply to that muscle so that it will work properly. And then what happens is, as you get older, these start to die, so these nerves die. And when these nerves die, the muscle starts to become paralyzed. That's called post-polio syndrome. So in post-polio syndrome, once again, in post-polio syndrome, what's going to happen is nerves that were still healthy, that were not affected by the polio virus, will help innervate an area of the muscle that had the nerves get damaged by the polio. But as you get older, these nerves die, and now you get post-polio syndrome, and people start to get paralyzed. The other problem is for the most part, polio likes to affect the larger muscles of the thigh and a little bit lower down the spinal cord. If it gets up higher, it can actually affect the part of the spinal cord that goes out to the diaphragm. And if it affects the diaphragm, you can't breathe. And that's usually how people die from polio, is they actually lose the ability to breathe. One other thing I want to point out, we already said that polio does not affect the muscle. It does not affect the muscle. Polio also does not affect the peripheral nerves that are here. Any peripheral nerves that are here. It does not affect the peripheral nervous system. It just affects the central nervous system. Okay, it affects the central nervous system, not peripheral nerves, just the central nervous system. Okay, so now let's look at the vaccines here. So there's two vaccines in the polio virus. And let's see if we can see all of it over here. The first one is called the Salk vaccine. And this was discovered by Jonas Salk. It's the Salk vaccine. Okay, and this was the first vaccine that was made. The Salk vaccine is actually made up of dead viruses. So what they did, and I can't remember exactly how they did it, but the Salk vaccine was made up of dead viruses. And then what they would do is they inject the dead virus into people, right? So I'm going to inject it here. There's my little needle, right? And then the vaccine can work in a few different ways. In this case, what it could do is, as we talked earlier about the spikes that were on the polio vaccine, the spikes in the polio vaccine, what this can do is it can actually build up antibodies, and they'll attach onto these spikes now. And remember, you have hundreds and hundreds of spikes on a virus. Okay, they attach onto the spikes, and now the spikes can't attach to the receptor on a cell. And when it can't attach to the receptor on the cell, what happens is it can't get inside the cell, and therefore you don't have a problem. So even though it doesn't kill the virus, it keeps the virus from attaching to it. So it'd be like this. It'd be like having your hands and your feet stuck in cement. And then you're trying like to reach for stuff or grab onto stuff and you can't. Okay, so that's the way that worked. The bad part about this is first it's a shot, right? It was a little bit more expensive than the next one we're gonna talk about. But the other thing is that, in case I didn't explain it right, because it's dead, yeah, it would recognize this, so when it actually saw live ones, it would have the antibodies. All right, you did need booster shots with this. The second type was known as the Sabin vaccine. And in the Sabin vaccine, you could actually take it orally. So it's also known as the oral polio vaccine. Now, instead of being dead viruses, this one, they were weakened, but they were still alive. The problem with this one is, yes, you could drink it, it was cheaper, but the problem with this one is that it would actually cause polio in some people. And it was a very small amount, and from what I've read, we don't do this one anymore. So that was the Sabin vaccine. So that's basically it for polio. As you can see, there's no damage to the peripheral nervous system. There's no damage to the muscles themselves, even though the muscles become paralyzed. The diaphragm and other respiratory muscles may become paralyzed, and then you can't breathe, and that's when people die. If a baby gets this can also cause floppy baby syndrome, just like we said with botulism. So that's polio. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we hope to see you again.